So, of course, I want to start by saying thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and today we're talking about the essentials of Onshape. And this webinar is really intended for those that are just getting started with Onshape. So, this is really meant for those that are new to Onshape and kind of trying to understand the workflow, creating parts, creating assemblies, creating drawings. How does all that work in Onshape? It's really not intended for those that have a lot of time in Onshape. It's really meant as a beginner course for all those new users just getting started with Onshape. So the Onshape Essentials. Now, as I always say with these webinars, I really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions dialog in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question, and I'll do my best to stop and answer the questions as we go through today's webinar. This is really your opportunity to ask any question that you'd like, so especially valuable for those new users that just want to understand how things work in Onshape. Feel free to ask any question, and again, I'll do my best to stop and answer them. You'll hear me stop and answer them from time to time as we go through today's webinar. All right, so let's dig into it. Now, before we get into the topic of the day, there are always a few things that I like to mention about Onshape in general. And one of the first things I always like to mention is our mission statement, our goal with Onshape. And that is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. And this includes mobile devices. So Onshape has an Android and iOS app that gives you full CAD editing capabilities. But it also means any computer. Windows, Mac, Linux, Chromebooks, you can really access your CAD data from any device. The other element of this is working together, working collaboratively. I'm going to show you an example of this in just a bit, but it's really about, sharing with others and collaborating with your team. How do those things work in Onshape? And our goal with Onshape, again, is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. So let's jump into my next topic, the next slide I'd like to walk through, and that's just a brief overview of Onshape itself. Now, of course, Onshape is professional 3D CAD. Generally, when people think of professional 3D CAD, they think of parts, assemblies, and drawings, and we do have, of course, parts, assemblies, and drawings. But we have a lot of things that aren't in other professional 3D CAD systems. One of the first and probably most important that I like to mention is just our frequent updates. If you're coming from some other file-based system where you're used to updating your software, you may be used to once a year getting an update. In Onshape, roughly every 3 weeks you see new features being added. So frequent updates is something that's very unique to Onshape. And the neat thing is you don't have to do anything. You log in and new features are there. There's no downloads, installs, updates. You simply log in. So frequent updates, one thing that definitely sets us apart from other professional 3D CAD systems. The next thing I always like to mention is version control. Again, if you've come from an older system, a SolidWorks, Inventor, Creo, one of those types of systems that creates files, you'll know that managing files is a headache. And oftentimes it requires you to have some kind of separate data management system, some way of managing all those files, managing the revisions or versions that you create, and so on. And so oftentimes, users in these systems go out and buy expensive, PDM systems to manage all the data they're creating. And Onshape, that's a built-in capability. You don't have to have a separate data management system as, the capabilities of a document have that built in. So you have the version control built in. You have the ability to create versions or revisions and go back to those points. And you have all of that history in the document automatically. So there's no separate data management system needed. It's all built into core Onshape. Now, the other thing I always like to mention, again, if you have another CAD system you're using, or maybe you just have a library of CAD data that you work with, we can import and export a lot of common CAD formats that are out there. So, Step, IGES, Parasolid, all of those, of course, but even the native formats, SolidWorks, Inventor, Creo, CATIA. So there's a long list of supported formats for both import and export. So it really means that Onshape works well alongside other CAD applications, or it works well with that library of CAD data that you've built up over the years. So definitely give it a shot. Again, import and export a lot of different formats. Now, the next thing I want to mention, I'm going to show you an example of this in just a bit, is entirely new methods of collaboration. One of the really unique things about Onshape is that you can collaborate with others in real time. This is something that no other CAD system can offer, and it really is a big difference when we start talking about data management. And I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by this in just a moment, but if you've ever used Google Docs, you'll know that when I share a document with someone and they make changes to it, I instantly see those changes. We're not passing files back and forth like we would be with Microsoft Word, for instance. And the same thing applies to Onshape. The equivalent Microsoft Word would be something like a file-based system where you're passing files back and forth via email. With Onshape, you collaborate with others in real time, just like you would in Google Docs, for instance. Now, the last thing I want to mention, custom features with FeatureScript. If you're at all interested in programming, Onshape has created a custom language specifically for creating CAD features. And the really neat thing about this is it's just you can do all kinds of very cool things, very cool features that can save you a lot of time, ensure consistent design, even conform to standards that your organization may have. So all very cool stuff. And again, if you're at all interested in writing code, if you have even just a little bit of experience in writing code, definitely check out FeatureScript, especially if you're interested in kind of creating your own CAD feature. All right, so these are just some of the things that I like to mention about Onshape in general for those new users out there before we get into the essentials of Onshape. And that's the essentials, of course, using Onshape. And the goals today are pretty straightforward. You can think of this very much as a crash course, so to speak, in Onshape. Right? We're going to cover the interface. We're going to build a simple part, assemble that part into the assembly, and then create a drawing of it. So in the very high level, a day in the life of an Onshape engineer. What does that look like? How does the workflow go? How do I go about creating my part, assembling it, and so on? So we're going to cover at a very high level these topics, and then we're going to get into also how to import. Very simple option, so it won't take long, but I do want to show you how to import. So if you have CAD data in another system, I'll walk you through importing. And then, of course, feel free to ask any question that you'd like. I'll do my best to answer all the questions that come through GoToWebinar here. So again, there's a question section in your GoToWebinar control panel. Ask any question that you'd like, and I'll answer them as we go through. All right, so let's dig into it. Now, one last slide, I promise, and then we're going to jump right into Onshape itself. If you had to take 5 things away from this webinar, so if I had to say, remember these 5 things, if anything else, from today's webinar, it's the first thing is Onshape runs in the browser. One of the more common questions we get even today is, how do I download and install Onshape? And the answer is you don't. You log in through any WebGL supporting browser. This is Chrome, Opera, Firefox, Safari. You want to avoid Internet Explorer and Edge. Right? So again, Chrome, Opera, Firefox, Safari all work great, but keep in mind you do not download and install Onshape like you would other CAD applications. It runs entirely in the browser. So that's probably the most important thing I would stress if you're just getting started with Onshape. You won't find a download link. You just log in through the browser. The next thing I would keep in mind is in Onshape, a document is a project level container. And the reason I bring this up is, as a new user getting started, a lot of people think that a document equals one CAD model. So I have to click create, and every time I want to create a new CAD model, I got to create a new document. That's not the case. Think of that document as that top level, container, folder, so to speak, for all of your project. So one document can have hundreds of parts. As many assemblies as you want, top-level assemblies, as many drawings as you want. You can even import miscellaneous files into a single document. So again, think of the document as a container for the entire project. If your project is, I'm going to design a frame for something, well, I could put every part, the drawings, everything inside of one document. Right? So again, a document is a project-level container. It's not a single CAD model. And that's the confusion that often happens. Now, tying into this, a very important part of the interface that we're going to discuss in just a moment is the different tabs across the bottom. So as we jump into a document and you start to get into your design, you can have all these different tabs across the bottom of the document, and that's how you access all the pieces, the parts, the assemblies, the drawings. Each one is going to have a tab at the bottom. And even as I mentioned, imported files, you can even import maybe spreadsheets or miscellaneous project files that you want to store in the document. You can store them as a tab in the document. Now, the last 2 things I want to mention, sharing and collaboration are built in, and data management is built in. And the reason I bring these things up is we get asked often, is there a collaboration program I can download and install for Onshape? The answer is no. It's built into Onshape. There's a big share button. Do I need a separate PDM system for Onshape? The answer is no. Those abilities are built in. So in other systems, if you've come from a standard, file-based system, these are separate applications. In Onshape, they're core functionality. They're not something that has to be installed or managed separately. All right, so these are just 5 key things. If I had to point out 5 things to remember from this webinar, this is what I would have you remember. All right, so let's dig into it. Enough slides. I want to jump right into Onshape. Now, as I mentioned before, the key thing that I would stress, one of the most important things to remember from this webinar is there's no download or install for Onshape on your computer. Right, so it doesn't matter if it's Windows, Mac, Linux, Chromebooks, you access Onshape via the browser. Now, I'm running this on a MacBook using Chrome, but you could be using Windows, you could be using Linux, you could be using Chromebooks. It really doesn't matter. Any WebGL supporting browser will work just fine. And you log in by going to cad.onshape.com. So cad.onshape.com. And if this is, if you haven't logged in yet, you're going to be asked to sign in, right? Sign in is your username and password, and potentially, if you have it turned on, two-factor authentication to authenticate you. But once you're logged in, you'll be taken to the documents page, right? So cad.onshape.com, that's how you access your Onshape data. Log in, and you'll be taken to this page. Right? This is your documents page, and you can think of, again, the document as a project level container. So a list of documents is a list of my projects, right? And that's the way you can think of it. So that's essentially what the documents page is, really just a list of all your various projects that you may be working on. There are a few important pieces of the interface that I want to stress while we're in the documents page, and then we're going to jump into a model in just a moment. First, and probably most important, especially as you're getting started, how do I find that document I'm looking for? Well, you can do a search. Right at the very top left, you'll find search, and just like you might expect, you can type in a name, do a search, and it's going to filter by anything with that name. So fairly straightforward search. What is worth mentioning here that I always like to point out is you can search by a lot of things. So you can search by description, by revision. I can say, show me all parts, assemblies, documents that are in the, waiting for approval state, for instance, right? So I can do all these things to do more specific searches by specific criteria. Maybe I want to search by everything with a certain part number, or everything at revision C, right? So I can do all of those things with this advanced search drop-down in the search dialog. But that's the simple search. It works like you'd expect. You can do a simple text search, or you can dig in and search by other values as well. On the left side, we have the big blue Create button. And like you'd expect, when you're getting started, this is how you're going to start a new document. It's also, by the way, how you import. I mentioned earlier I want to show you how to import. It's very straightforward. You click this button. This says Import Files. You browse to the files you'd like to import, and they get imported into a document. That's really all it takes to import into Onshape. So just keep in mind, if you're trying to import files from some other CAD system into a document, this is where that option is, right under Create. Now we also have, of course, the ability to create a new document, and when you're first getting started, this is where you're going to start, right, by creating a new document. But as you can see, I've already got quite a few documents created here. Now, the other thing I always like to mention to those new users getting started, the filters on the left are very valuable. For instance, I think for most users, the most common filter is just recently opened. Show me everything that I've been working on recently. Right, so that's recently opened, but you have filters for my documents, created by me, shared with me, another valuable filter. Even filters to show me what's owned by the company, if you belong to a company. All right, so I can filter by all of these things, and it just makes it easy to find the document I'm looking for. One last thing I want to mention on these filters on the left, at the bottom, if you're just getting started, 2 valuable filters are public and tutorials and samples. The reason I bring these up is that if you're the type that likes to learn from others' examples, the public models are a huge resource. Literally thousands, tens of thousands of models of things other users have made public that you can learn from. You can even copy it and build your own variation of that thing. These are designs that were deliberately made public by the owner, by the person that created them. And they serve as very valuable learning tools. So definitely check out the public models if you're getting started and you just want to know, how would I model an F1 car? Well, there's a public model for that, right? How would I model a pneumatic cylinder? Well, there's a public model for that. And many of these have the whole sketch and feature trees intact. You can actually look at the steps that were taken to design these things. So very cool stuff and worth checking out for new users. Now, the other thing I mentioned is tutorials and samples. This is a little bit more, I would say, instruction based. It's not just, going through a bunch of documents, seeing how things are done. This is, here's an example model. Here's a video that goes along with it. A little bit more instruction and less kind of free form, but it's an equally valuable tool for learning. So if you're interested in just creating your first part or creating your first assembly, definitely check out the videos and examples in these documents. All right, so these are the filters on the left. The last thing I want to mention on the documents page before we jump into a document are the icons in the top right corner here. Now, the first thing I want to mention is the Onshape App Store. One of the common questions that I get is, how do I find CAM? Where's rendering? I need to do a finite element analysis. How do I do these things in Onshape? And the answer is you'll find a lot of different apps available in the Onshape App Store. So here's one a rendering app for Onshape that runs right inside of a tab in the document, right? An integrated cloud app. So Onshape has partnered with all kinds of different apps in different areas. So no matter what you're trying to do, chances are there's an app in the Onshape App Store available for you. So definitely check out the Onshape App Store. Again, you'll find the icon there in the top right corner. Next to that is invite friends and share. I'm going to go over both of these in just a moment when we discuss sharing and collaboration. So I'm going to skip those for now. But I do want to mention two very important ones in the top right corner here. First is the question mark menu or the help menu. And I would say first things first, the help menu at the top of the list is a very valuable link. Our help is very robust, very easy to understand, and it's updated at the same frequency Onshape is. So the moment a new feature is created, the moment something is added to Onshape, it's immediately documented in the help. So if you're interested in what does this option do, or some little detail in some command, chances are help has the answer for you. So definitely check out the help. Also under the help link is Learning Center, videos, tutorials, feature script documentation if you're interested in writing your own features. But I think for many users out there, the common question that I get asked is, where are the keyboard shortcuts? And you'll find those again under the help menu. There's a long list of keyboard shortcuts depending on what you're doing at that time. So again, under the help menu, you'll find keyboard shortcuts, also links to forums, the latest what's new, the latest improvements to Onshape, feedback tools, all kinds of different things, but all valuable links for those users getting started. Now, the other thing I would point out in the far right corner is your account. You'll see your username there in the top right. The reason I bring this up is the common question that I get asked is, how do I change my default units? How do I change how Onshape zooms or pans or rotates, or one of those kinds of global settings? And you'll find these under your username. So if I click the username, I go to My Account, you'll see Preferences. Here you can set things like the units. What's the length of the units? What of course, what units do you want? Do you want millimeters or inch? So on. You can also set things like view manipulation settings. So if you've come from SolidWorks, for instance, I can set my zoom, pan, rotate to behave just like SolidWorks. So just keep in mind, if you're looking for global settings on your account, so that you don't have to change the units every time, or you don't have to learn a new way to rotate the model, check out your account settings that are in the top right corner there. And under Preferences, you can set a lot of these default settings. All right, so enough talk about the Documents page. We are going to now jump into a document. Now, you may have noticed at the top here, I have several tabs in my browser open. You can have as many Onshape tabs open as you would like, and you can even move them to as many different monitors as you would like. So just keep in mind, it's really flexible in the sense that it's running in the browser, and you get all the benefits of a tab in the browser. You can move it anywhere. You can have as many open as you'd like, and so on. All right, so this is the bike frame. This is just one of the documents that you saw in my list, in the document list. And what I want to do today is walk you through building a simple part for it, assembling that part into this bike frame assembly, and then creating a drawing of that part. And that's the idea, is just to really high level build a part, assemble a part, create a drawing of it. What do those processes look like? So this is, of course, a document in Onshape, and once you opened up the document, you'll see this is really where you get the work done. This is where you do your design. And there are a few key pieces of the interface that I want to walk through now in the actual modeling environment. So let's start at the top left corner. You'll see the Onshape icon. If I left click, that takes me back to the documents page. It's a way to close the document, right? So just keep in mind, if you left click this Onshape logo, closes the document out. Next to that is the document menu. You can change the units of the document. You can change the properties. A commonly asked question, how do I give it a part number? Or how do I set the state of a design? You can do all that under the workspace properties. Next to the document menu is versions and history. Now, one thing I would point out is, notice nowhere in this interface is there a save icon. And the point that I want to make here is that you never have to worry about saving in Onshape. All of that is done automatically for you. So every little change that you make to the document gets stored in the history. You can think of the history like an infinite undo, right? I can go back to any point, any little step done to this design, and restore to it, right? So this is what I was talking about earlier. In other CAD systems, you would need expensive data management systems to have these kinds of capabilities: the ability to see the history, the ability to restore to any point, the ability to create a version in the document. All of that's generally associated with expensive PDM systems, but in Onshape, it's core functionality. You can see I don't have to worry about saving, right? So I never have to worry if my computer crashes, do I lose from my last save, and so on. And it gives me this ability to go back and see every little change and who made that change, when, and where, right? So it's really a valuable tool for not just an audit trail of everything that's happened, but also you never have to worry about breaking things, right? I think a lot of users are afraid to open a finished design because they're afraid of breaking. What if I make a change that causes this domino effect? And the answer in Onshape is you never have to worry about that. I can easily restore to any point. So I don't have to worry about experimenting, right? So that's versions and history. We're going to go over that in a little bit greater detail in just a bit. But I do want to stress, again, in Onshape, you never worry about saving. Everything that you do is automatically saved. Now, moving to the right, we're going to cover these in just a bit. I've already mentioned briefly the App Store. I'm going to cover those in just a bit. The next thing I want to focus on are the three, what I consider key pieces of the interface when you're working in Onshape. The first is the toolbar. Across the top here, you'll see the toolbar. Now, the thing to keep in mind is this toolbar will change. So depending on what you're doing, we are looking at an assembly, the bike frame assembly. So we're saying assembly icons, insert all the various mates that we have, ways of defining more advanced motion. These are all assembly level tools. But if we were to jump into a part, we would see part modeling tools: extrude, revolve, sweep, loft. Those are all in the Part Studio. If we go into a sketch, we would see sketch tools in this toolbar. You would see lines, rectangles, and so on. So just keep in mind the toolbar is always in the same place, right here at the top, but the icons, the things in it, will change depending on what you're doing at that time. Now, in this case, we're in an assembly, but we're going to jump into a part in just a bit, and you'll notice all of these icons will change. Now, the next thing I want to mention in the interface is the instance list, or the feature list on the left side. Now, this is a familiar concept if you've come from other professional 3D CAD systems. So if you're familiar with SolidWorks, for instance, this is a very similar thing, right? You have the list of parts, your list of mates in this assembly. Or in a Part Studio, you had your list of sketches and your list of features. And this is essentially the order that you took and the steps that you took to create that model. It's a familiar concept, again, if you have experience with Pro 3D CAD. If you're not, just again, think of it as all the steps in order that you took to build that thing, whether it be a part or assembly. So this is the instance list, or in the Part Studio, the feature list. The last thing I want to mention in terms of the interface is the tabs across the bottom. And I've already briefly mentioned this earlier, but a document, one document can have dozens of parts, even hundreds of parts, and subassemblies and top-level assembly, all kinds of different drawings. So one document can hold all kinds of different things, and you access all of this via the tabs across the bottom. Right, so here I was in the assembly tab. Now I just selected a new tab. Now I'm looking at the shock for this bike frame. I'm going to select the next tab over. Now I'm looking at the dog bone link for this bike frame. And one thing I want to point out, notice the toolbar has changed. Right, so now that we're looking at a part and we're in the Part Studio environment, I see all the part modeling tools: extrude, revolve, sweep, loft. So again, just highlighting that toolbar will change depending on where you're at and what you're doing. So this is the Part Studio tabs. I have assembly tabs. I have drawing tabs. I even have tabs for things I've imported. So you can see this is a swing arm .sld.prt. It's a SolidWorks part file that was imported into the document, translated in Onshape. You can see here's that swing arm, again, designed in SolidWorks, and I'm now using the swing arm in my assembly in Onshape. So we can store miscellaneous files, maybe imported files like the swing arm, or even random, project-related files. Maybe I want to store PDFs or quotes or G-code or, all kinds of different things can be stored as a tab within the document. But the big thing I want to stress is these tabs across the bottom each have their own purpose. And as you get into bigger projects, you're going to want, folders for storing your tabs, very similar to folders for storing your files. So it's just a way of organizing. But just keep in mind, you have part tabs, assembly tabs, drawing tabs. That's where you're going to spend a bulk of your time. So those tabs across the bottom, very important piece of the interface. All right, so we've discussed enough about the interface. I want to get into building a part. And what I'd like to do is walk you through modeling this dog bone link, right? Real simple part, and we're going to keep it basic here just for the sake of time. But I do want to start from scratch. I want to build this model from scratch, something very similar to it. And we'll do what we can with the time that we have. So let's start a new part. Right, so I'm going to go to the plus icon in the bottom left corner. I'm going to choose Create Part Studio. That will give me a new blank Part Studio in my document. Now we can start creating a part. I'm going to start with this sketch on the front plane. So I'll select the front plane, select the sketch icon, and now I'm in a sketch on the front plane. Now, one last step that I want to stress, very important when you're sketching, is viewing normal to the sketch plane. I want to rotate the model around so that I'm looking straight at or normal to the sketch plane. Now, if you're a fan of keyboard shortcuts, you can use the N key to do this. But I want to use this opportunity to show you the right-click menu, because I think the right-click menu in Onshape is very important as you're getting started. In general, I would say if you're looking for an option or to edit or delete or change something, try right-clicking on it. If you want to export, right-click on what you want to export. Right? If I want to edit a sketch, right-click that sketch, and you'll see those options. So again, the right-click menu, I can't stress this enough, is really critical as you're getting started. You're going to find all kinds of very important options and commands in that right-click menu. I just right-clicked an empty space in this blank sketch, and you can see I have the option to view normal to sketch plane. But again, you'll use the right-click menu everywhere, not just in the sketch. You'll use it in the parts, assemblies, drawings, all of it. Very right-click menu friendly. Right-click menu is a context-sensitive list of options, so you'll get different options depending on the thing that you right-click on. All right, so now we're in a sketch. We're on the front plane. We're ready to start sketching, and I'm going to start with a simple circle. So I'll select the circle command from the toolbar. Again, notice toolbar has changed. Now that we're in a sketch, I see sketch icons, right? Different sketch tools. And I've selected my circle, and I'm starting to move my cursor around the origin here. And you can see as I do that, I get these inferences to appear. It's telling me this is horizontal, vertical, and so on. Much of the constraints that you create in Onshape are automatic. You don't have to actually manually create anything. So if I want to create a circle at the origin, I just move my circle over the origin, and it highlights. It tells me you're creating a coincident constraint between the center point of the circle and the origin. So much of the constraints you create are automatic. If I want to create a circle in the origin, I move my cursor over the origin, left click, and now I have a circle. right? So very simple, 2 left clicks, just moving my cursor out to define its size. And we're going to do this one more time. This time I want to circle horizontal to the right of the last one. And you can see as I move my cursor up, I get that horizontal inference to appear. Right? Left click, and now I have 2 circles in my sketch. Now we have 2 circles, but we don't know the size of these 2 circles. So the next step for us is to add a dimension. So I'll select the dimension command from the toolbar, left click the circle, and left click to place the dimension. Now in this case, I want the value to be 25, and then I hit enter. What you'll notice is the sketch will automatically scale to match that first dimension. So if I zoom in, you can see I now have a dimension on the circle on the left. The other thing I would point out is notice the circle on the left is black. And this means it's fully defined. In Onshape, you get visual feedback as to the level of definition of your sketch. The circle on the left is fully defined. I don't need to do anything more to it. But the circle on the right is underdefined. The size of the circle, the diameter of the circle isn't defined. And also its distance from the origin is not defined. Right? So again, just that visual cue. In general, you want fully defined sketches. So I know that I need to add some dimensions or constraints to this circle on the right. So let's do that. Let's add a dimension. Again, I'll select the circle, left click to place the dimension, and enter a value of 20. So now we've defined the diameter. We need to define the distance from the center. So left click the center, move my dimension down, left click, enter a value, let's say 85, enter, and now both circles are fully defined. Both circles are showing black. Right? All right, so now what we want to do is sketch lines that join the 2 circles. But before I do that, I want to sketch a construction line between them. One commonly asked question, how do you create construction geometry? Select whatever command that you want. In this case, we just want a line. Then choose the construction command from the toolbar. Right, so I choose construction, then I can left click a point, move my cursor to where I want the line to end, left click, and now we have a construction line that joins the 2 circles. The reason this is important is now we can sketch one line here that joins the 2 circles and mirror that to the other side. Right, so let's do that. I'll select line, select one circle. Notice as I move my cursor over the circle, it highlights, indicating that I'm attaching my line to that circle. Left click. Again, I get that visual cue, that highlighting, indicating I'm constraining it. Left click. And now I have a line that's attached to the 2 circles. Now the point of this is I want to take this line and mirror to the other side. So I can choose the mirror command in the toolbar. Left click the line that I want to mirror about. Then left click the geometry that I want to mirror. In this case, just this one line. Now you may ask, well, couldn't you have just sketched another line? And the answer is yes. But the neat thing about the mirror is it gives us that symmetry. So it ensures the 2 lines remain centered about the center. And that's really critical, of course, in our design. So that mirror is just an intelligent way to build in that intent. So the last thing I want to do here is add a dimension for the distance between the 2 lines. Again, just left clicking each line, move my cursor out and left click again. Enter 16, enter, and now we're back to a fully defined sketch. Now, as you've noticed, as I've gone through all these different sketch techniques here, we haven't had to create any constraints manually. And I would say that about much of what you do in Onshape. You're not going to have to manually go in and add constraints after the fact like you have had to do in other applications quite often. But there will be times when this is necessary. I do want to point out first, you can see all the constraints by checking Show Constraints. So there's a little checkbox there in the sketch dialog. If you check Show Constraints, it will turn on all the little flags for each of the constraints in your sketch. And you can see all these constraints were created automatically as we were sketching, right? Just things that snapped into place. But there will be times when you need to create your own constraints. So what does that process look like? Let's do this. Let's sketch 2 more circles, and I'm going to deliberately sketch these circles just out in random space. Now, you wouldn't actually do this, but I just want to show you it as an example. So here I've got these 2 circles, right? And I want these circles to be centered on the two previous circles. And I want them to have the same diameter. I want them to be equal. So we need to create those constraints. Let's start with equal. Now, the process of creating constraints is the same regardless of what the constraint is. So if you want to make these two circles equal, it's the same steps as if you want to make these two circles concentric, right? It's all the same. So what I would say is simply select the things that you want to create a constraint with and select the constraint. I want to make this circle equal to this circle, so I left click, and then select equal from the toolbar, right? So I'm simply selecting the geometry that I want to constrain, select the constraint from the toolbar. Now, if you change the diameter of one, they both change, right? It also means if I add a dimension to one, the diameter for both is defined. So and it doesn't matter what the constraint is. That's all that it takes. You simply select the geometry involved, select the constraint that you want. I want this circle concentric with this circle. Again, left click, choose concentric from the toolbar. Same thing over here. I want this circle concentric with this circle. Left click, select it from the toolbar. Right? So, and it doesn't matter what the constraint is, whether it's perpendicular, parallel, tangent, equal, all the process is the same. It doesn't matter what the mates are. Just select the geometry involved, select the constraint from the toolbar. The last thing we have to do here is add a dimension to our sketch, which should be a value of 12. And now we're back to a fully defined sketch. So now we're ready to take what is our finished sketch and turn it into, of course, a 3D model. We can use Extrude, Revolve, Sweep, or Loft, all the tools that you're familiar with. We're going to stick to the Extrude command to keep things simple. But one thing I like to stress about Onshape is you don't have to be overly concerned about trimming sketch entities. And this, if you're familiar with, other CAD applications, sometimes you have to go in and trim away sketch entities to have one enclosed loop because it doesn't know how to handle the feature otherwise. In Onshape, that's not necessary. So I can leave these sketch entities as they are, overlapping contours essentially, and go straight to the Extrude command. Right, so I choose the Extrude command from the toolbar. Onshape automatically recognizes all the outside contours and any nested contours within them and chooses that profile to extrude. So again, the big thing I would stress is you don't have to spend lots of time manually trimming sketch entities just for the purpose of creating a feature out of it. It's smart enough to realize what you're trying to do. Now, you can say, I want to choose specific pieces within this sketch to extrude, and we can get into that in a different webinar, but the big thing with stress is don't worry too much about trimming sketch entities just for the purpose of creating the feature. Now, this dialog, you'll see the Extrude dialog here that pops up, should be pretty familiar if you've come from other 3D CAD applications that have Extrude, Revolve, Sweep, and Loft commands. You have your options for depth. You can define your end type. So you have symmetric, you have up to face, up to next, up to part, up to vertex. Again, just allowing you to define the depth of your extrude. In this case, we just want a simple blind depth of 25 millimeters. And I can hit the green check OK. So now we've created our first sketch and our first feature, and you'll find both of them listed here in the feature list. So sketch 1, extrude 1. If I need to make a change, if I need to edit the depth of my extrude, or I need to edit a dimension in the sketch, I can simply right-click that thing in the feature list. Right? So here I'm right-clicking the sketch. You'll see the options like edit, rename, delete, roll back, so on. So just keep in mind, again, that right-click menu is really critical to using Onshape in general. A lot of the options that you can find are in that right-click menu. All right, so we've created our first sketch and feature. Let's do this one more time real quickly here. I'm going to start another sketch on the top plane. So top plane, new sketch, normal 2. I'm going to use the N key there for normal 2. And now I'm ready to start sketching lines. So I'll select the line command, and I'm ready to start sketching just 3 simple lines. Now, the things I always like to mention is, it should be an intuitive, easy to use experience if you've come from other CAD systems. So, if I want to add a dimension for an angle value, just select 2 lines that aren't parallel and it automatically gives you that value. If I want to dimension, for instance, from a plane to a point, just left-click a plane, left-click a point, and there you have a dimension. So you don't have to be really picky about the things you dimension to. Just simply select the dimension command and start left-clicking the things that you want to control. All right, so a question that's popped up: can dimensions be entered as an equation? The answer is yes, but there's one caveat. You have to use what are called variables in Onshape. So first step, create the variable, then you can input the variable into your dimension. And you can say this minus this divided by this plus this if you want to build out those equations. But they require you to create variables first. So if you're going to do any more digging on that, I would definitely check out, just do a search for variables in Onshape. All right, so I've created 3 simple lines. I need to offset all 3 of those lines. And a tip that I can give you is in the offset command, you'll see here in the sketch toolbar, if you left-click drag one piece of the sketch, in this case I want to offset all 3 lines, if I left-click drag just one piece, one line within that 3, it will automatically grab everything connected to it. So if you're in a situation where I have dozens of lines and arcs and I need to offset them all at once, just left-click one piece of it and it will automatically grab everything. Right? So you don't have to sit there and left-click each one or Windows select or do anything like that. Just left-click drag. So I left-click, we'll enter the offset value. In this case, we want an 8mm offset, and there we are. We have the offset 3 lines. The last thing we're going to do is close these things up and attach them to the ends of the part. Now, a commonly asked question is, do you have commands like project or convert entities or use or any of those kinds of commands that exist in other CAD applications? The answer is yes. We have a command we call use. Like the name implies and like exists in other CAD applications, it essentially takes faces or edges or past sketch entities and converts them to the current sketch. This allows you to build in some design intent. For instance, I want to attach the ends of this sketch to the edges of the part. And I want to add separate dimensions here. So we can select the use command, select the edges, and convert those to lines. So here I've just converted the silhouette edges of that part to lines in my current sketch. The reason that's valuable is then I can attach my line to that line, right? Just left click each, choose coincident, right? That brings them together. Left click, coincident, and now I have a sketch that's constrained to the edges of my part, right? So just a bit on design intent, but the thing I would say is if you're familiar with commands like project or convert entities, or there's a few other names for it, but in Onshape we refer to it as the use command. You'll find it right here in the toolbar. All right, so we've created our second sketch and we're ready to create our second feature. And one of the common questions that I get asked is, how do I find the cut command in Onshape? Where's cut, extrude cut, swept cut, whatever it is that I'm looking for? And the answer is there's no cut specific button in the toolbar. And the reason is we want to simplify the interface. So instead of having a separate button for cut, you simply go to the extrude command, the same extrude command we went to a moment ago, and choose the option within it to remove. Right? So you can see there's the remove option. The remove option gives you a cut. So just keep in mind, it doesn't matter if it's extrude, revolve, sweep, loft. You won't find a dedicated button in the toolbar for cut. It's simply an option within that particular command. So that remove option. Now you also have some other options. You have add, which will merge that feature with the part that it's attached to. You have new, which will create a new part within the part studio. And this gets into a little bit more advanced topic of multi-part modeling. A lot of powerful techniques can be adapted by creating multiple parts together. And this is how you go about creating new parts. But we want to explore the intersect option. And intersect will give us only what's intersecting between the current feature and the part that you're defining in the merge scope. Right? In this case, it gives us that bent dog bone link shape because those are the things that are overlapping between the two. Right? So I can hit the green check OK, and now we have a simple bent dog bone link shape. Now, another commonly asked question, can you hide the planes? Yes, the P key on your keyboard will hide and show the planes. So if you want a quick way to get rid of the planes or bring them back, the P key on the keyboard. All right, so up to this point, I'm sure if you've been using CAD for a while, you're new to Onshape, but just want to understand the workflow, this should look pretty familiar, right? This is a common workflow in almost any professional 3D CAD system. That's just kind of the way they're built. Sketches and features the core of it. We've discussed that, and Onshape itself is meant to be an easy transition from some of those other CAD applications. But there are a lot of things that we can do in Onshape that you can't do in those other CAD applications. The example I often give is collaboration. If you wanted to share a model with someone in an older system, you had to send them a file, right? And you had no idea what was going on with that file until the file was sent back to you. And then you had to deal with replacing the references and all the things that goes along with sharing a file. The idea behind Onshape is we want to eliminate this back and forth with files. So rather than sending files back and forth, we share within the document. So in this case, let's say that I wanted to share with someone in my design team, and I want them to work with me on this model. Rather than sending them a file, I share with them a link to my document, and we work together on the same model at the same time. So let me give you an example of how this works. In the top right corner, there's a big button that says Share. If you click that, you can enter in their email address and define their permissions. Right? So here I've entered in their email address. I define their permissions, very important step. Maybe I want to share with just a vendor and they don't need edit permissions, right? They just need to look at it. I can choose Can View. I can choose Can View and you're not allowed to comment, you can't copy, you can't export, so I'm really restricting their ability to do anything but view. Right? If you think about sharing with a vendor, sharing with a vendor with a file, you have to kind of trust them, that file is not going to be distributed to anyone else. Right? With Onshape, I can say you're not allowed to export, and I'm restricting that permission. Now, in this case, I can say, well, we'll give you edit permissions, but you can't copy the document. Maybe you can't export it, and maybe you can't share it with others. Right? So really granular control over the permissions that you're allowing other people to do with your document. But that's really it. By default, everything you create in Onshape is private, right? Unless you explicitly make it public or you share it like we're doing here. Now I'm going to share it with this individual. We'll click the big share button. The neat thing is they don't have to download or install anything, right? So if you've ever tried to share a file with someone else before, you'll know you got to send them some kind of a viewer, some way to view the model, and you got to hope that they have the right version of software installed to view that model. You don't have any of that with Onshape. They literally click a link and they're looking at the same model as you are. Now, if you've ever done any kind of sharing with Google Docs, it's very similar. In fact, there are a lot of similarities in the visual cues, the feedback that you see. So you'll notice I've shared that document. Someone has popped up in the top right corner here. There's a little visual cue of a face. That's the visual cue that someone else is here. Right? Remember, we're not sharing copies of files. We're both working on the same set of data. If they switch tabs, I will instantly see that. I can see the tab that they're on the bottom here. Little visual cue. If they decide to add a feature, you're going to see, again, little visual cue, new feature being added. So you're getting real-time feedback when things are changing in the model. The big thing I would stress is, it's very useful in scenarios where maybe I have big assemblies I need to put together, right? That's a task that's typically been done by one person. And Onshape, it can be done by several people. The other thing I would stress is you're always aware of the latest state of the design. In file systems, you have to wait for a file to be sent. You have to wait for a file to be checked in. You have to wait for a file to be merged. And Onshape, if someone makes a change, I instantly see it. There's never a discrepancy about when it took place, who did it, and when. There's never this ability to, not undo. I have all of that in Onshape. I never have to worry about managing the files myself. So again, any changes made by anyone, update for everyone instantly. In fact, if you'll notice, a new fillet was added to our Part Studio. That fillet was created by the person that I've shared this document with. So any little change, if they go in and decide they want to change the appearance, for instance, I'm going to instantly see it update. Right? So real-time collaboration, you're both working on the same set of data, you're not working on duplicates. And the other big thing I would stress is, again, remember, everything is being tracked in history. So let's say that you share your document with someone. You say, you know what, I don't care for the changes that you've made. It's easy to go to a step right before that and say, let's restore it. So I can see who made what changes the moment they made them. And I can see all of this in the history. And if I don't care for a change, I can easily restore the document. So again, keep in mind, you can share with anyone. You have to explicitly share it with them by default, not shared in the document, but you can share with them, work together in the same model in real time, and the history and the versions all update for everyone instantly. So that is just one of the benefits to kind of the collaborative experience in Onshape. There's a lot of things we could get into, but probably the biggest thing I would stress is just the fact that you can work together in real time. It's not a process of emailing files back and forth. When you share a doc with someone, everyone sees everything update instantly. And it doesn't matter whether they're in front of their laptop, their desktop, their iPhone, their Android phone or tablet. If someone makes a change, it instantly updates for everyone. All right, so that is just one of the things I wanted to mention about collaboration. Now I want to take the last few minutes here to get into assemblies and drawings. And one of the unique things that I wanted to point out about Onshape assemblies is the mates are a bit different than many other CAD systems. So if you have experience with other CAD systems, we are a bit different, but we've done it a bit different just to try and save time. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. Let's insert. I'm going to go to the insert here and insert that dog bone link that we were looking at earlier. Right? So I just left click to place it, and now I've inserted my dog bone link into my bike frame assembly. Now by default, when you insert a part like this, it's moving, it's free to move in any direction, right? It's floating, so to speak. So you can, rotate it. I can, left click and drag it and move it any way I want. There's no constraints. My goal is to attach this link arm to the frame and the swing arm, right? So that it joins the two and I get working suspension here. Now, if you've come from other CAD systems, you may be familiar with, selecting combinations of faces. And the example I often give is imagine that you're mating a bolt to a hole in something like a SolidWorks. Oftentimes that would be 3 different mates. Something to define the concentricity between bolt and hole, something to align the face of the bolt head to the face of the part, and something to keep the bolt from spinning. 3 different mates to position one bolt. In Onshape, we've tried to take a different approach to simplify this, and mating a bolt to a hole in Onshape is one fasten mate. Now, what this means is generally you have fewer mates to create, fewer mates to manage or troubleshoot, and just simpler understanding of the assembly. So let me give you an example of how this works. Rather than use a combination of faces, we use what we refer to as mate connectors. You can think of them as connection points between parts. So in this example, I want to attach the link to the frame, but it needs to be able to rotate and pivot. So I'll choose the Revolute mate from the toolbar and then move my cursor over where that connection point should be. Where does this link arm connect to the frame? And as I move my mouse, you can see all these little points appear over the part. And so what you're doing here is defining here's the point where this part attaches to another. Right? In this example, it's this point, and it attaches to this point on the frame. Right? So all I'm doing is I'm bringing these 2 points together. So you can see why mating a bolt to a hole is a whole lot faster in Onshape, because I'm just saying bring this point to this point, and all the movement is defined just by the type of mate that I choose, which is in this case one fasten mate. Now in the case of a link arm, it needs to be able to pivot, to rotate. So that's why we chose the Revolute mate. But keep in mind, each mate has a specific type of motion that's allowed, and it depends on the type of movement that you need, which mate that you choose. So I hit the green check. Now if I left click drag that link arm, you can see it's only free to rotate. It can't move in and out, up or down like it was a moment ago. So we've constrained one end of this. Now, just because we're using a simple approach to mates doesn't mean that you can't create complex assembly motion. It's easy for me to take, another mate, for instance, this cylindrical mate, and attach the other end of the link arm to the swing arm. Right? And so now, if I grab and drag, we have that realistic pivoting action from the suspension. Right? Two questions that I missed, forgive me. Is it possible to edit an IGES or step file? Remember, an IGES and step file don't have sketches or features, so you won't be able to edit the sketches or features, if that's your question. You can do direct editing, commands like delete face, move face, resizing fillets. But remember that an IGES or step do not have the sketches or features, if that's what you're trying to edit. Next question, is it possible to restrict the motion? Yes, in all the scenarios, whether it's angle of rotation or linear travel, all of the mates with movement have an option for limits, and you can punch in how far you want to allow it to move. So definitely do a search for that if you're interested. All right, so we have just a couple minutes left, and I wanted to get to drawings before we end things here today. So I've discussed briefly inserting a part, assembling the part. The big thing I would stress is, take a moment to learn how Onshape does it, because it's a lot faster than trying to use combinations of faces if that's what you're familiar with. It does take a moment to get the hang of it, but it is definitely a faster approach once you do so. All right, so let's get into drawings. Now, as I mentioned before, you have tabs for parts, you have tabs for assemblies like we've shown here so far. You also have tabs for drawings. So let's create a new drawing. I'm going to go to the same plus icon on the bottom left corner, and I'll choose Create Drawing. I'm going to choose my template. We have lots of Onshape provided templates. You can even import or create your own. I'm just going to choose this default ISO A4 template. So what you'll notice is a new drawing tab is created in the document. So here in the bottom left, I've got a new tab for drawing 1, and now I can choose what part or assembly do I want to create a drawing of. In this case, we'll choose the dog bone link, and then we can start dropping in our views. Now, for time's sake, I'm not going to spend tons of time laying out the drawing, but needless to say, we have section view tools, detail view tools, auxiliary view tools, all kinds of different tools that allow you to create just about any kind of drawing view that you're looking for. Dimension tools as well. So just take some time to really dig into some of the Onshape drawing tools. Let's create a detail view here. So quick detail view, add a few dimensions maybe. I think you can kind of get the idea here. But the big thing I would stress is just keep in mind that drawings are integrated right into the document, right? They're just another tab within your document. They're managed with all the same versions and history, right? So if I go up here to my versions and history, I can see all the dimensions and detail views that I created. So it's all integrated directly into the Onshape document. It's just another tab in your document. The other thing I would mention is you can have as many sheets in the document as you'd like, or in the drawing as you'd like. So, one drawing tab can have dozens of sheets for different things related to the project. One last thing before I let you go. You can also auto-populate the title block based on properties if you choose to set things up that way. I know a lot of organizations like that, so when we insert a part or assembly, it automatically fills out all of the title block. All right, so we have just under 2 minutes left, and I want to leave a few minutes for questions, so I am going to stick around and answer any questions that you have. So feel free, again, ask any question in the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll answer them. I'll stick around and make sure I get to all of them. But that's what I had, everyone. Thank you, and have a good day.